I'm looking at the top list here, and once again, it's Aero, Avnet, and TTI in your top three spots here in the Americas. But the interesting thing on the list too is if you look at the mid-market distributors, their growth seems to be better than those of the top tier. So, what do you say about that?
I think that part of this is the emergence of this military aerospace market. The
Mhm.
military aerospace market has a significant degree of specialization that
Mhm.
takes place. You have mil spec components, right, that come into
Mhm.
play, and you have rad hard types of products that come into play. And so I think the greater specialization that's come into play with the strong development of the military aerospace has opened opportunities for the mid-market players. They haven't had the large volume, but they've been positioned more to meet the more specialized demands that are out there. And so I think they've been able to benefit from that. Now, I'm not saying that the big players, Aero, Avnet, TTI, don't have the ability to do that, but I think just in terms of playing to the alignment, the stronger orientation of the business models, it gives a bit of an advantage to those mid-market players that are out there. And so
Right.
I think that the end market is really driving that opportunity for them.
Okay. Now I know can't talk to you without talking about what's going on in terms of tariffs and export restrictions and the impact that's having on the market. What do you see in there?
Major issue. And in fact, back in spring of last year, we twice a year we bring together the members of our councils and the interest groups, and we have the opportunity to come together to discuss major issues in the industry. And a year ago in spring, the only topic that was being discussed in those meetings was tariffs.
Mhm.
and and interestingly, I'll go back just a little bit earlier in time. The year before that, the major topic was export controls. And so the government has played a significant role in shaping the fortunes of our industry. Um,
Mhm.
Most recently, tariffs, and then before that, the export controls and the significant penalties that could be put in place if you were found in a violation of the entity control list that's out
Mhm.
there. So, but tariffs, as we look at sentiment, we measure every month the sentiment in market, well, the sales sentiment for electronics components and distribution. And we started off the year very strong sentiment, and then we had the introduction of the what we call the IEPA tariffs, and
Mhm.
President Trump deploying those in a very aggressive fashion on the whole world. And that really spooked the market for a couple of months there. And so the distribution channel really had to adjust to respond to this big shift in tariffs. And so we had to make that adjustment. But then a big issue throughout the course of last 2025 was that there was so much, you talk about volatility. Well, there was so much volatility in the announcements of tariffs and changes in tariffs and what was happening with this country or that country. And the thing that happened is the government, well, they can announce, well, next week we're going to make this change. Well, we're trying to steer an aircraft carrier in the distribution industry. We can't turn things on a dime.
Yeah.
And so this was just giving nightmares to everybody in the distribution channel because the ability to respond as quickly as the government wanted
Mhm.
responses was just a nightmare. So the distributors and their partners had to really work hard to cope with that situation. Now we have a new situation that's evolved, of course, as we started. The Supreme Court ruled that IEPA tariffs were not legal. And so now we have a different situation where there needs to be refunds for some of these, and there's an entire process that has to take place there. And so in our meetings that just took place last week, this process for how we engage with the refunds and how you take care of that and keep yourself out of legal trouble, I guess you could say, with your customers has become a major issue. And also, you have to be very careful on signaling because there are other tariffs that continue on. There's
Yeah.
multiple types of tariffs, and so other tariffs will continue on. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but
Right.
so while one big category of tariffs has gone away and we have to sort out the refund
Mm-hmm.
solution, there's others that stay in place. And so communicating that between the suppliers and the consumers of electronics components, that becomes a major issue. So it can the whole thing with the government and tariffs continues to be a real management challenge for everybody in the supply chain.
Yeah. So here we are, we're in second quarter now of 2026. You mentioned before you're hopeful for a good year, but there's a risk of imbalance. So what's your crystal ball telling you about what the rest of 2026 might have in store for us?
The way things are going at this point, I think we're on track for a solid growth year. I believe very much that we'll have a second year of solid growth. Um, and that's borne out, I guess you could say. Again, we do our industry pulse survey every
Hmm.
month and every quarter. And the results of the industry pulse survey in March were we had reached lofty heights in terms of sales sentiment. Strongest sales sentiment we've had in 5 years. And it's true across the board of all component types and all end markets. And so, through the first quarter of the year, very positive sales sentiment. We're just finishing up our April survey. We'll see what comes out of that. Now, the expectation was that we'd cool off a little bit in April, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We'd reached, you don't want to become too overheated, but even cooling off, it would still be extremely strong sales sentiment in the marketplace. And just even the informal conversations that I've heard, including discussions that took place at our meetings last week of our ECIA council members, are that things are still in a very strong position in terms of market demand.
Hmm.
And so the major issue is, just like I say, balancing that demand with other areas. And so I do have somewhat of a concern for 2027 because we are trying to manage this golden screw thing. The HBM memory has become kind of the golden screw. That's applied pressure on pricing and supply for other DDR4, DDR5 type memories. And then even beyond that, the data centers, you have other component demands that come into place. So for example, in power. So you have challenges for power ICs. You have challenges for certain passive component types,
Hmm.
capacitor types. And so, they're not as big as the HBM memory, but there are other component types that are seeing their lead times extend out significantly. Some of them for, lead times of a year plus.
Hmm.
And so it's not just the memory, it's other component types. So this supply chain balance will be a major issue for managing the supply chain through the course of 2026. And how well we manage that will in many ways dictate our opportunities in 2027. Do we
Hmm.
wind up with excess inventory and not enough supply of electricity going into 2027? And so those are significant issues. And one of the area I just have to mention, I mentioned electricity, but also just the massive investment that's required. We're talking, depending on whose numbers you believe of the cost for each of these data centers, you're talking somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion of investment that companies are talking about putting in place. That just dwarfs anything that's ever been done before, including, one comparison was made in a recent article, including the interstate freeway system that Eisenhower put in. I mean,
Right.
something that ambitious, even if you scale it up, for inflation or whatnot, putting in place $7 trillion of investment,
Yeah.
I mean, that that will consume almost all the free cash flow of your major tech players out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I hear that. You see in the news sometimes stories of little towns kind of out here who we're getting a data center in town, and it drives all this enthusiasm. They think of all the infrastructure and all the support services that might come with that. So
Yeah.
um, I'm sure there'll be some disappointments in there, though, as well. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You see some city councils now that they're getting in trouble. Their citizens are saying, we don't want that data center. We see all the problems that come with it now. And so you're getting some backlash that's shaping up in some places too.
listen, two quick things before I let you go. I know that you have a report based on your conversations with executives. You've been talking about that in your sentiment. That's going to come out at a later date, right? Do you give some insight into that?
Yeah, and so coming out of this report, one of the things we do is a survey looking at what are their expectations for growth opportunities and what are their views on terms of the greatest challenges that
Hmm.
they're facing in the current year. And so the results of those surveys create an opportunity for me to go out and do interviews with top industry executives. Now, part of my challenge in kind of the sequence I've done this in the past is I've done these surveys, well, these interviews with executives before I had the results of the survey. And so I was kind of speculating about, okay, you know, it was more subjective, I guess you could say, in terms of the questions I would pose to the executives. Now I'm going to have the actual results of the surveys, which will allow me to be a bit more targeted and precise. So the interviews that I do with the executives is going to be delayed a little bit. Also, people want the numbers as quick as we can get them. And so I really put a push to try and get the data into people's hands as quickly as
Hmm.
possible. But now coming out of this, there are some key themes that emerge. You know, you have four key areas, well, maybe five that really emerge as the top supply chain challenges. Won't be surprises. Number one by far is geopolitical conflicts. That's the biggest concern that comes out. Cybersecurity threats come up number two. And then slightly behind that, government regulations, extended lead times, and China tariffs. So those are your top concerns, significantly higher than other potential challenges in the supply chain. Some areas that had been real concerns in the past, dropped off significantly. Nobody's really concerned about weekend market demand at this point, not so much concern. I mean, across the board, I would say that there's concerns and concerns have increased significantly across the board, but those are your big four. Now, looking at opportunities for sales growth, this is an interesting area. So if you look at near-term sales growth, um, not a shock. Artificial intelligence, both near term and long term, seeing significant opportunities. Next, though, in the near term is edge computing. And, that's one of the interesting things, it's worth commenting on briefly. Um, there's a new memory architecture that could provide some relief on the memory side, TurboQuant, that Google has introduced. And it can ease perhaps some of that architecture can ease the demand for memory more in the inference. There's two key functions, inference and training. It can ease the demand on the inference side, not so much on the training side in artificial intelligence. But some of that easing also means that there could be opportunities for deploying more AI out towards the edge and becoming less reliant on shall we say the data centers themselves. And so there could be actually a longer term demand play that comes into place in edge computing as you can have potentially lower cost, more feasible architectures
Hmm.
for solutions out at the edge. And so edge computing also becomes a significant opportunity.
Interesting.
Interestingly, some areas that roll off, robotics roll off a bit in terms of in the near term, what we would view in the prior years. So there are some segments that roll off in terms of opportunity. Electric vehicles, backed off significantly from where they had been in terms of the opportunity that people saw. Now, in the long term, robotics emerged in a big way. So number two behind AI is robotics, then autonomous vehicles, then edge computing,
Yeah.
and then biomedical technology, interestingly enough. So those become very big in terms of opportunities. And so, longer term, those are the opportunities that we see out there. And so I won't get into all of that, but robotics, there could be interesting players coming into the picture there. At the Consumer Electronics Show, I was struck by, who's best positioned to perhaps play a major role in the development of robotics. And I'm not talking just humanoid robotics. I mean, you have players in that, but if you go out and you look at who has the key pieces in place, the key technologies, and many of these suppliers of the modules for automotive solutions are really well positioned for the robotics space. And so, you could go out there, you can make a car today, and you don't have to build anything on your own. You can just take pieces and just put them all together from different suppliers, and you can make a car. It's incredibly impressive, the ecosystem that's been developed in the automotive space. And that same ecosystem, I believe, is extremely well positioned for the robotics space, not just humanoid, but other types of robotics that come into place. And so I'm excited to see what takes place in that. Just one little quick thing, if you look at the different booths and displays at Consumer Electronics Show, if you go to someplace like an LG or Samsung, obviously the big thing for those companies are their displays, their TVs. It's always exciting to see what they show on that. But for the first time this year, it struck me there was a significant exhibit in the booth for LG Electronics that was on actuators. Now that's an electronics component.
Yeah.
And why is LG making such a big deal about their actuators? But they clearly see the need, and this plays into robotics, And so many of these companies are positioning themselves for the robotics opportunity. So there's some exciting things taking place that go beyond artificial intelligence. And maybe some way there's synergies, of course, with artificial intelligence. But, many of these things, there are the synergies. Autonomous vehicles, edge computing, obviously strong synergies with AI. So there's a good, I should say, halo effect that goes out from AI and how it affects the rest of the market. So I'll have an opportunity to present these questions to the executives. And I'm sorry, one more thing, just reflecting back, I did pose the question to our executives in the past about artificial intelligence and the role it would play in managing the supply chain. And while some were quite enthusiastic and really felt strongly about the opportunities that AI played and the important role AI would play, it wasn't unanimous. There were many executives that did not really see a key play for AI in managing their supply chains. I think that will be a very different story with everybody. I think there will be a more unanimous view on AI in the supply chain moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Listen, my last question to you, and I'm going to call you, I see over your right shoulder on the back there, delivering clarity in chaos, right? I love that tagline. So the EMS industry, obviously one that we are tightly interwoven with. Several years ago when there was the chip crisis or whatever you wish to call it that went on back then, they got caught and it really hurt their business for a while. So coming out of this and everything that you've looked at, what type of advice would you offer to EMS companies moving forward here as in terms of engaging and tracking and staying up to date with what's going on in the industry that you cover so well?
Well, the EMS companies, I think that it's a similar situation that component manufacturers are in. I think there has to be real due diligence that goes into place to assessing the demand that's being communicated to them by their customers. I think that there's always the risk in where we wind up with the excess capacity is that out of concerns, there's the double ordering, there's over projection of opportunities. And so I think that there has to be some real clear, the clarity and chaos. There have to be some clear, honest discussions between EMS and the component suppliers and their customers that, we don't wind up with this strong imbalance almost going forward, because it hurts everybody if that takes place. And so the best advice I can give is the communication and the honest and clear communication between customers and suppliers becomes critical at this point.
Yeah.
And so I think that, we don't have really a magical tool. I mean, there have been some people, and I've steered away from this term, but some people have said, well, we want to go out and we want to measure true demand. My experience and efforts to create something that measures true demand is you create a system that collapses under its own weight. My entire career of 30 plus years, I've had people wanting to put together, a unified theory of the marketplace that can really measure and predict and help you understand and give you 100% visibility. Has yet to be successful, and I have yet to see an approach to that could be successful. So the concept of a unified model or a true demand, I don't think you can turn to that. I think that the key continues to be there has to be clear, honest communication about what people are seeing up and down the supply chain, from end market demand through the supply. And that clear communication, I think, is the best thing that participants in the supply chain can engage in at this point.
Okay. Good. No, thank you for that. I know the audience will appreciate that too, because, hopefully, what's the old saying? Best you can do with history is learn from it, right? So we know what happened several years ago. We all hope not to repeat our history, right? So,
but at the same time, when I first started doing market research in the technology industry, people were saying back then, over 30 years ago, the cycle is dead. We know how to manage this. The cycle is dead. The cycle is not dead. The cycle is healthy and strong. So you should anticipate the cycle will continue into the future.
Yeah. Very, very good. Dale, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, sir. You provide an invaluable service to the industry and the work that you do, and I always look at my opportunities to speak to you, and I always come out of this a little more informed than I was when we started. So I thank you for that, and hopefully next time I call, you'll be willing to come on again.
Cool. I always look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.